This is one of the most infuriating cases in Australian history. A seemingly ordinary classmate gathering turned out to be a carefully orchestrated farewell ceremony. Even more unbelievable, everyone who knew about it chose to stand by and watch, indifferent to the loss of a young life in the end. After 36 hours of agonizing suffering, he passed away. Perhaps even in his final moments, he had no idea that the whole thing had been arranged by the person he loved most. The tragedy we're covering today sparked widespread outrage and intense debate across Australia, because the killer served only 4 years before being granted parole, and later even became something of a public figure, living a relatively free life. So what exactly happened back then? Let's travel back to 1997 and re-examine this brutal tragedy that once ignited public fury. When people think of Australia, Sydney or Melbourne usually come to mind first, but in reality, Canberra is the capital. Canberra is one of Australia's largest inland cities, and a very low-key one. It is known as the Garden City Beautiful, with a high standard of living and a relatively low crime rate. And today's story takes place right here.
Yeah, can I get an ambulance, please? Well, he's vomiting everywhere. I have a person potentially overdosed on heroin.
Potential.
At 12:10 p.m. on the 26th of October, 1997, Canberra's Emergency Dispatch Center received a distress call. The caller was a woman named Anu Singh. She told the dispatcher that her boyfriend Joe had lost consciousness due to a drug overdose and needed immediate help. About 8 minutes later, an ambulance arrived at 79 Andile Street, Anu, led the paramedics to the bedroom. As soon as they entered, they saw Joe lying on the bed. At that moment, Joe was naked from the waist down, his skin an eerie reddish brown, his lips already pale blue, with blood and vomit in his mouth. His stomach was visibly swollen, and he had stopped breathing. Paramedics immediately began resuscitation efforts, but after more than 10 minutes of trying, Joe showed no signs of life. Ultimately, they pronounced him dead. Hearing this, Anu completely broke down. She screamed in disbelief. "No, I don't believe it. This isn't real. You have to bring him back." She even threw herself onto her boyfriend's body, kissing and slapping him, crying and saying, "You can't leave. Don't abandon me." This near hysterical state continued for a long time. It wasn't until around 12:31 p.m. when police arrived that Anu's emotions began to settle slightly. Afterward, the coroner began examining Joe's body. Toxicology results showed that Joe had large amounts of sedatives and illegal drugs in his system. His free morphine concentration was 0.67 milligrams per liter, already above potentially lethal levels. Such a high concentration would cause severe vomiting and other serious physiological reactions. Additionally, Joe had taken 2 to 3 sleeping pills before consuming the drugs. The combination significantly increased the risk of fatal poisoning. Police also noticed needle marks on Joe's arms, injection sites. On the surface, he looked like a long-term drug user, but problems quickly emerged. Why would a normal person, already having taken sleeping pills, then inject themselves with such a massive dose of drugs? That behavior was highly abnormal in itself. So some officers began to suspect Joe's death might not be a simple overdose. Perhaps someone had deliberately killed him. Since Anu was the only person at the scene, police naturally wanted to get more information from her. But Anu was clearly traumatized. She would scream at the slightest provocation. Her speech was chaotic, and she couldn't communicate normally. Police had no choice but to temporarily set aside direct questioning, and instead investigate the relationship between the two, looking for anything suspicious. As the investigation deepened, Anu's strange personal history began to surface. Anu was born on the 3rd of September, 1972, in Punjab, India. Her parents were both Indian, Australian doctors. In 1973, the family immigrated to Sydney. From an early age, Anu was a very unusual girl. She was extremely insecure and had an intense dependence on her family. As a child, she couldn't sleep unless she was with her parents, but at the same time, she was incredibly rebellious. From age 13, she dated various boys, skipped classes for dates, and later started experimenting with drugs. Yet despite this rebellious lifestyle, her academic performance was exceptionally strong. Even if she didn't attend classes for weeks, her exam scores still ranked among the top, like those effortless geniuses you see in movies. In high school, she not only ranked first in her grade, but also achieved a graduation score of 94.1. With such excellent grades, she was admitted to the Australian National University to study economics and law, a double degree. Her academic achievements made her family very proud. Her father often said, although Anu was always getting into trouble as a child, she was definitely impressive when it came to studying. In 1991-old Anu moved to Canberra alone, renting a house near the Australian National University. But after living alone, her dependence on her parents only grew worse. She would call home 5 or 6 times a day, every weekend when she had to return to campus. It would be a chaotic scene. In her second semester of freshman year, Anu was involved in a minor car accident near campus. Although she wasn't seriously injured, psychological factors and other issues led her to take a year off from school. A year later, Anu returned to university, and it was here that she met a male classmate named Simon. Simon was handsome and funny, quickly charming Anu. They fell into a passionate relationship and began living together. Later, Anu became pregnant, but since they were both still in school, they didn't keep the child in 1994. Anu successfully earned her economics degree. Academically, everything had gone smoothly for her. But in her personal life, things began to change. During university, Anu became increasingly involved with drugs. Her temper grew volatile, and she frequently argued with Simon. The relationship cooled, and the distance between them grew. During a school break, Anu went with friends to a club in Newcastle, and it was here that she met a man who would change everyone's fate forever. His name was Joe. Joe was a sunny, outgoing young man. He was born on the 11th of June 1971 to Italian immigrant parents and had a younger brother who was 4 years his junior. The family lived in Newcastle and was very close knit. Joe loved sports from an early age. During his school years, he played soccer, tennis, basketball, and other sports, and he performed well in all of them. With his good looks and athletic build, Joe never lacked admirers. In November 1994, 24-year-old Joe graduated from university. After graduation, he traveled for a while, then returned to Newcastle and found a job with a civil engineering firm. At that time, Joe's life was quite comfortable. He had a stable job, a loving family, and a good social life. His family assumed he would keep living that easy, carefree life, until Anu came along. After meeting Anu for the first time, Joe was immediately drawn to her and pursued her relentlessly. At the time, Anu hadn't officially broken up with Simon, but she didn't reject Joe's advances either. The two quickly got together. Simon, Anu's then boyfriend, soon noticed something was wrong. Anu had been secretly chatting and calling someone, sometimes even giggling at her phone. After a few days of watching, Simon confirmed he had been betrayed. Enraged, he had a fierce argument with Anu, calling her a psycho and an idiot, hurling insults at her. Then he stormed out. Their relationship was over. Logically, Simon, the one who had been cheated on, should have been the most hurt. But strangely, it was Anu who completely fell apart. After the breakup, her grades started to slip. She would burst into tears without warning, couldn't sleep at night, and would pace around the house. One time, her mother got up in the middle of the night and was startled to see Anu wandering around the house alone. When pressed, Anu said she couldn't accept Simon calling her an idiot during their fight. She felt deeply humiliated and couldn't let it go. Her family thought she just needed time to recover, but that wasn't the case. From then on, Anu's condition only worsened. She grew increasingly depressed and withdrawn, but through all of this, Joe never left her side. The two lived in different cities, Joe in Newcastle, Anu in Canberra, but their relationship seemed strong. However, it was sustained largely by Joe's unilateral efforts. Besides calling Anu nearly a dozen times every workday, every Friday Joe would drive to Canberra to spend the weekend with her. Then, at around 4 a.m. Monday, he would drive back to Newcastle to be at work by 9:30 a.m. Newcastle to Canberra is nearly a 5-hour drive one way. That meant Joe made this exhausting round trip every single week. Most people would be drained by even one such trip. But Joe kept at it and seemed to enjoy it. If Anu ever said she felt unwell, Joe would even fly to her side immediately to take care of her. He was incredibly attentive. Anu consumed almost all of Joe's time. Sometimes, even during meals, he would be on the phone with her for an hour. His parents felt their son had become completely controlled by the relationship. His former life, his career, even his family, everything seemed secondary to Anu. Eventually, Joe quit his job entirely and moved to Canberra. He and Anu even opened a joint bank account, depositing money for their future wedding. At that point, Joe clearly regarded Anu as his future wife. To outsiders, Anu seemed to have found the perfect boyfriend, a rare devoted partner. Many friends envied her, thinking she had landed someone who would do anything for her. Everyone expected them to marry and live happily ever after, but the truth was, the deeper Joe invested in the relationship, the worse Anu's mental state became. By the end of 1996, Anu began frequently complaining about physical problems. She said her legs ached and her whole body felt unwell. Sometimes, she even felt like she had multiple heads, each speaking to her at once. She also claimed she could feel bugs crawling under her skin, as if eating away at her flesh. At the same time, she became obsessed with her weight. At barely 80 pounds, she was already extremely thin. Yet she still considered herself too fat. She began crash dieting, drinking only cola, and spending 4 to 5 hours a day at the gym. She even declared she would rather starve than be fat, and considered liposuction. In addition, Anu often became convinced she had various serious illnesses. One day it was chronic fatigue syndrome, another day a viral infection, sometimes even permanent nerve damage. Almost every day brought a new disease. No matter how many doctors examined her, she refused to believe she didn't have a serious problem. Her parents contacted many psychiatrists, but with little success. Anu became more and more certain that her body was beyond repair. She even started making arrangements, selling her nice clothes, giving away her CDs to friends, and leaving notes resembling suicide letters for her parents. By June 1997, things had gotten even worse. Anu began having suicidal thoughts. She researched suicide, related books at the library with her best friend Rao. She even asked a law student for a gun, but he refused to lend it to her. When Anu's family learned about this, they grew extremely worried. Their greatest fear was that Anu would actually go through with it. But in the end, the one who died wasn't Anu, it was Joe, the man who had devoted his entire life to her. After Joe's death, police found his diary in the bedroom. The entries showed that Joe had always been a positive, optimistic person. Not long before the tragedy, he had bought a new car. He even wrote about his hopes for the future, words that didn't belong to someone who wanted to end his life. More critically, according to Joe's family and friends, he had never used drugs and even strongly disapproved of them. So the question was, why would a man who never used drugs, who was excited about the future, suddenly take sleeping pills and inject himself with a potentially lethal dose? Police increasingly suspected that the drugs in Joe's system were not self-administered, and at the time the only person with him was Anu. However, the paramedics' account initially puzzled police, because before they arrived, Anu had been performing CPR on Joe, trying to save his life. Even after paramedics took over, Anu continued assisting with chest compressions. From these actions, she didn't seem like someone who had just murdered her boyfriend. Without more evidence, the investigation stalled. But just when police were at a dead end, a paramedic casually mentioned a detail that became the crucial breakthrough. It turned out that when Anu called emergency services, she hadn't given the correct address or her real name right away. If she had simply discovered her boyfriend unconscious and wanted to save him, why hide the address and her identity? Was it just panic and confusion, or did she know exactly what had happened in that house? Police began interviewing Anu's friends and classmates and checking her phone records, and the more they dug, the more problems emerged. According to classmates, Anu had exhibited numerous suspicious behaviors from mid-September and early October, all the way to the morning of the 26th of October, the day Joe died. She had repeatedly purchased drugs from a man referred to in the case as Mr. T. Once, Mr. T asked her, "Why are you buying these things?" Anu replied, "I don't want to live anymore." Then she added, "And there's someone else who is going with me." On the morning of the 26th of October, around 9:30 a.m., Anu met Mr. T again for another transaction. Another classmate was present and clearly heard Anu say, "I did something I shouldn't have done." Moreover, Anu had previously asked classmates, how should drugs be injected? What would happen if someone overdosed taken separately? These questions might be dismissed as curiosity, but when connected to Joe's death, their meaning changed entirely. Paulus soon discovered even more disturbing details. Before Joe's death, Anu and her best friend Rao had organized two gatherings. The first was on the 20th of October. The second was on the 24th of October. Both gatherings invited many friends and classmates, and Anu had directly told them this wasn't an ordinary party, it was a farewell ceremony, because she and Joe would soon be leaving this world forever. She also bought sedatives from classmate Kamak and asked about the proper dosage. Additionally, Anu told her counselor that Joe was violent and abusive toward her, but police later found no evidence to support that claim. Even more chilling, Anu once told a classmate, "I've studied psychiatry. It is not hard to make people think I am crazy." When these pieces of information were laid before police, Anu was no longer just the only person at the scene. Her suspicion level skyrocketed. Beyond these suspicious statements, police also found anomalies in Anu's call records in just 2 to 3 days. From the 24th of October to the 26th of October, she made nearly 100 phone calls. The calls were mainly to Rao, her best friend, classmate Ryan Kamak, and an unidentified woman referred to in the case as Lucy. Paulus quickly tracked down these individuals. Rao was initially reluctant to share details, but the others' testimonies gradually pieced together an utterly absurd and horrifying truth. It all went back to the second gathering, on the 24th of October. That day, Anu invited many friends and classmates to her home. On the surface, it was just a casual get-together, chatting, drinking, enjoying the evening. But before the party even started, Anu had already told many people about her plan. She repeatedly said she was going to end her life, and she planned to take Joe with her. So among the people at that gathering, everyone except Joe knew it was a so-called farewell ceremony. What is truly incomprehensible is this. Many of those present were highly educated students, including law students. They knew Anu had repeatedly talked about taking Joe with her, yet not one of them stepped forward to stop her. Not one of them told Joe. Joe attended the party as usual, completely unaware that the people he was chatting and drinking with had long known about his girlfriend's plan to kill him. He was the only person in the room left in the dark. The party lasted until about 3 a.m. Then, classmates began leaving one by one. Finally, only 3 people remained: Anu, Joe, and Anu's best friend Rao. And what happened next turned this so-called farewell gathering into a real murder plan. After the party ended, things didn't stop. Between 5 and 6 a.m., Rao left Anu's house. After she returned home, she told Lucy, who was staying with her, everything she knew. Rao revealed that Anu was serious about ending her life, and she planned to take Joe with her. Even worse, Anu had already given Joe sleeping pills and injected him with drugs. Lucy was stunned. She never imagined the farewell ceremony was real. She immediately called Anu and demanded, "Why are you doing this? You have no right to take Joe's life. I am calling the police." But Anu flatly denied it, saying she would never hurt Joe, and telling Lucy, "You are overthinking this." That response left Lucy in an awkward position. She didn't know Anu that well, and everything she knew came from Rao alone. She began to doubt, what if this was just a sick joke? What if she called the police and nothing had happened? Hesitating, Lucy decided to contact Anu's classmate Ryan, asking him to check on Anu and try to talk her out of it. But Ryan's response was eerily calm. "I've known about this for a while. Don't worry, nothing will happen." Lucy was baffled. How could Ryan be so sure about such a serious matter? She called Anu again. This time, Anu had clearly lost patience. She warned Lucy not to interfere. If she called the police or told Joe, there would be consequences. Lucy was furious, but after calming down, she began to second-guess herself. Even Anu's closest friends didn't seem concerned. In the end, she chose not to press further. Unfortunately, the one person who had recognized the danger and tried to help ultimately gave up. Why was Ryan so certain that nothing would happen? It had to do with Anu's past behavior. Earlier, in May 1997, Anu had told Ryan she had AIDS and even claimed she had deliberately put her blood on Joe's toothbrush so he would be infected. But tests later showed Anu never had AIDS. It was all in her head. Ryan had heard similar extreme, exaggerated statements from Anu many times. Over time, he became desensitized to her talk of death, illness, and harming others. He probably assumed Anu was just making things up again still. After the 24th of October gathering, Ryan did ask Anu directly, "Are you really going to kill Joe?" Anu replied that she had only put 3 sleeping pills in Joe's drink. She wasn't going to kill him on the night of the 25th of October. Around 10:19 p.m., Ryan even called Joe. Joe had been asleep almost the entire day and had just woken up. He told Ryan, "Bro, I am totally fine, just slept a little longer, don't worry." Since Joe himself said he was okay, Ryan figured things weren't as serious as he had feared, but none of them realized the danger was far from over. According to later forensic analysis, on the early morning of the 24th of October, Anu likely injected Joe with drugs for the first time after he had been sedated by sleeping pills, but that dose wasn't fatal. Joe just slept for a long time. That explained why he was able to wake up on the 25th and talk to Ryan. But Anu didn't stop. In the early hours of the 26th of October, she injected Joe again. Then she went out to buy more drugs from Mr. T. When she returned, Joe's condition was rapidly deteriorating. It was only at this point that Anu finally called emergency services. But even then, she didn't give her real name or address right away, deliberately stalling. Police believed she was trying to cover up the crime, afraid of being caught. In other words, from the first dose on the 24th of October to Joe's death on the 26th of October, the entire process lasted about 36 hours. And during those 36 hours, several people knew what Anu was doing, yet no one took Joe out of that dangerous environment. Police then turned their attention to Anu's best friend, Rao. The investigation revealed that Rao wasn't just a bystander. She knew Anu's plan, but not only did she not stop her, she even provided $250 Australian for Anu to buy drugs. That explained why Rao was so reluctant to talk when first questioned. She was afraid of being implicated. Even more shocking, the 24th of October wasn't the first time Anu had attempted this. Days earlier, on the 20th of October, Anu had organized a nearly identical gathering. The goal was the same, to end both her life and Joe's. Joe had been injected that time too, but he survived. So a few days later, Anu held a second farewell ceremony. And this time, Joe didn't make it. By now, police were certain Joe's death was no accidental overdose. Anu's involvement was overwhelming. A thorough search of her home uncovered alcohol swabs, medications, syringes, and injection-related materials. They also found a crucial diary. The diary revealed that Anu hadn't come up with the idea overnight. The plan to kill Joe had been in development for about 4 months. She had researched drugs, obtained them, studied injection techniques, acquired sleeping pills, and repeatedly told others about her plan. But this raised the biggest question of the entire case. Anu said she loved Joe. Joe had given her everything. So why did she insist on taking him with her? By this point, police were certain Anu was the key figure behind Joe's death. But many people would still wonder, even if Anu wanted to die herself, why drag Joe along? After all, Joe had given her everything he could. He traveled back and forth between Newcastle and Canberra every week. He flew to her side whenever she felt unwell. He quit his job and moved to Canberra, even opened a joint bank account with her for their wedding. How could such a devoted boyfriend become the one she wanted to take with her most? The answer goes back to Anu's health problems. During that period, Anu constantly believed she was seriously ill. To control her weight, she had used ipecac syrup, recommended by Joe, to induce vomiting. Ipecac syrup itself is an emetic, but Anu later became convinced that the syrup had caused all her physical problems. Gradually, she blamed Joe for everything. In her mind, if he hadn't recommended it, she wouldn't have become this way. Her thinking became increasingly extreme. She once said she wanted to kill Joe, her ex-Faye boyfriend Simon, and all the doctors who had treated her. Anu's headaches and depression were likely linked to her long-fatum drug use, but she refused to accept that explanation. Instead, she stubbornly blamed Joe and the ipecac syrup for all her physical and mental suffering. Yet that alone still seemed insufficient to explain why she would spend months planning Joe's death. The real catalyst came in June 1997. By then, Anu's suicidal thoughts were intense. She and Rao had researched death and suicide at the library. In one book, Anu came across a story about how when one spouse dies first, the survivor may eventually remarry, fall in love again, and start a new family. That is a perfectly normal human phenomenon. But Anu couldn't accept it. She began imagining, if she died, would Joe fall in love with someone else? Would he marry another woman? Would he start a new family and gradually forget her? She couldn't bear that possibility. If she couldn't have Joe forever, then Joe couldn't belong to anyone else after her death. So she arrived at an extreme conclusion. If she was going to leave this world, she would take Joe with her. From that moment, what had started as a suicidal impulse became a double murder plan. To achieve her goal, Anu made extensive preparations. She tried to borrow a gun. When that failed, she bought drugs. She sought medication to render Joe unconscious. She asked classmates about sedative dosages. She learned how to inject and studied the effects of overdose. She even told multiple people she was planning to leave this world, and Joe would go with her. The plan lasted about 4 months. What is truly incomprehensible is that Anu wasn't isolated. Many people knew what she was doing. Someone knew she was researching injections. Someone knew she was buying drugs. Someone knew she wanted to die. Someone even knew she was planning to take Joe with her. Yet, instead of stopping her, the people around her continued to help. Even Anu herself found this unbelievable. In her diary, she wrote, "Today I went to a friend's house to learn how to inject. I've been planning death all day. My friends know I want to die. Why are they helping me?" The irony is stark. Even Anu realized she was heading down a dangerous path, and the people around her did nothing to stop it. Another entry in the diary is even more chilling. Anu wrote, "There is someone who loves me very much. He would have made a perfect husband and father. But now, he has been destroyed by me." She also wrote, "I know I am being foolish and selfish. His parents will be in so much pain because I've taken their son from them." These words show that Anu was fully aware of what she was doing. She knew Joe loved her. She knew he could have had a beautiful life. She knew her actions would destroy him and devastate his parents. Yet she didn't stop. That contradiction runs through the entire case. After Joe died, Anu appeared devastated. She cried over him, kissed him, demanded paramedics save him. She also performed CPR, yet she was the same person who had given him sleeping pills, injected him with drugs, and organized a farewell ceremony. She had calmly executed a plan that took months to prepare, and when death came, she tried to reverse it. She wrote in her diary that she was destroying the man who loved her and still continued. What was Anu's mental state at the time that became one of the central disputes at trial? With the diary, syringes, drugs, and numerous witness statements, the case against her was overwhelming. Anu and Rao were soon brought to trial. But what truly enraged Australia wasn't just how Joe died, it was the sentence that followed. With both witness and physical evidence mounting, the case quickly moved to trial. Initially, Anu, the principal offender, and Rao, considered an accomplice, stood trial together. But as the case became clearer, the judge decided to try them separately. First, Rao, initially charged with murder, manslaughter, attempted murder, and other crimes. Shockingly, all charges were eventually dropped. The judge ruled that although Rao knew of Anu's plan and even gave her $250 to buy drugs, she had not directly participated in the actions that caused Joe's death. On the 5th of November, Rao was released on bail, set at $100,000. The decision sparked immediate outrage. Joe's parents were especially devastated. In their eyes, someone who knew the entire plan did nothing to stop it, and even provided money. Walking free was incomprehensible. But the court had made its decision. Joe's family, however furious, had to accept it, for now. Now the focus shifted to Anu on the 28th of October, 1997. Anu appeared in court for the first time. In the gallery, both families were present. Even then, Anu's father couldn't believe his daughter was a killer. He told the media she was simply a naive, kind, but somewhat weak, fey-willed girl. He refused to accept that she had deliberately killed Joe, but Joe's mother saw it differently. She believed Anu had controlled her son, pulling him away from his own life, consuming all his time and energy, and finally taking his life. She wanted the court to impose the harshest possible punishment. Anu herself consistently denied intentionally killing Joe. Her explanation: "I just wanted him to fall asleep, so I could end my life without him stopping me. I never thought he would die." Anu's defense team knew that with such overwhelming evidence, acquittal was nearly impossible. Their goal, therefore, was not to prove her innocence, but to reduce the charge from murder to manslaughter. They argued that Anu had never actually intended to kill Joe. When she realized something was wrong, she performed CPR and cooperated with paramedics. She even called emergency services. If she had wanted Joe dead from the start, why would she try so hard to save him? Therefore, they contended, Joe's death was the result of an unstable mental state and a miscalculation of dosage, not a premeditated killing. It should be treated as manslaughter. Prosecutors rejected that explanation. To prove Anu's actions were not accidental, they presented a key piece of evidence, a phone record from just minutes before Anu called emergency services, a call between Anu and classmate Kamak. The record showed that Anu hadn't called for help on her own initiative. It was only after Kamak repeatedly urged her that she finally made the call. In other words, the active attempt to save him wasn't as straightforward as the defense claimed. Prosecutors also revisited Anu's diary, packed with evidence of long Fey-term planning, researching drugs, learning injection methods, buying sedatives, telling others about her plan, organizing 2 farewell gatherings, all over 4 months. This wasn't a simple drug mistake. It was a well-Feyed planned, premeditated crime. In response, the defense raised another core argument. Anu had been suffering from severe mental illness at the time. They claimed she suffered from borderline personality disorder, depression, and eating disorders, long-standing psychological issues. At the time of the crime, her mental state was so unstable that she couldn't rationally judge the consequences of her actions. Therefore, her criminal responsibility should be diminished. This point would become the most controversial part of the entire case. On the 24th of June 1999, after considering Anu's mental state and her attempts to revive Joe after he lost consciousness, the court declined to convict her of murder. The original murder charge was reduced to manslaughter. The following day, the sentence was delivered. Anu was sentenced to 10 years in prison, with eligibility for parole after a minimum of 4 years. When the verdict was read, Joe's parents collapsed in the courtroom. They protested loudly, lost control, and nearly fainted from the shock. Because, to them, someone who had spent months planning, attempted twice to inject Joe, and ultimately caused his death, would serve a minimum of only 4 years. It was unbearable. Joe's mother later pointed to what she considered critical evidence, an entry in Joe's diary that read, 27 Monday, leave immediately. She believed Joe was planning to leave Anu. And after his death, some of his clothes and a suitcase were missing, suggesting Anu may have discovered his plan and decided to act. But the court hadn't given that evidence much weight. Joe's mother grew even more despairing. She later said that every time Anu walked past her in court, she desperately wanted to slap her and had to use all her strength to hold back. After the sentencing, public outrage in Australia was immense. Many felt that reducing murder to manslaughter could maybe be justified by mental health concerns, but a minimum of only 4 years before parole, far too lenient, some commented. She caused a man's death. 4 years is practically nothing. Others noted that Anu was a law student, familiar with both the legal system and the role of mental illness in criminal cases. Even more damning, she had once told a classmate, "I've studied psychiatry. It is not hard to make people think I am crazy." A more infuriating possibility emerged. Did Anu, from the very beginning, use her legal and psychological knowledge to prepare a defense, a way out for the inevitable trial? Whether true or not, the verdict stood. And what Joe's family found even more unbearable was that, just a few years later, Anu was back in society. In October 2001, 4 years after Joe's death, Anu was paroled and returned to society. Because she had already spent time in custody awaiting trial, she actually served only about 28 months in prison after the final sentence was handed down. However, while on parole, Anu tested positive for cannabis and was sent back to prison in April 2004. She was released again on the 5th of August of the same year. What happened next was even more bitter for Joe's family. During her prison sentence, Anu didn't stop studying. She earned a master's degree in criminology from the University of Sydney while incarcerated. After her release, she went on to pursue a PhD at Sydney Law School. In 2012, Anu published a doctoral thesis on female crime in Australia and how women escape from criminal involvement, and was awarded her PhD. Her research focused on the factors behind female criminality, upbringing, psychological issues, physical abuse, financial hardship, and mental health problems. In that thesis, over 100,000 words long, Anu even revisited what had happened between her and Joe. Later, in an interview, she said,
"There are many things people don't understand. There's a lot of things that have been overlooked. One of the biggest things was I was suffering from very, very severe mental illness at the time, and I would so like to reach out to the Cinque."
For Joe's mother, Anu's academic achievements after leaving prison were an unbearable insult. She believed Anu's research was just another way to attract media attention, to get back in the spotlight. How could the person who took her son's life now be studying crime, even claiming to want to help others? Joe's mother said Anu would always owe Joe an explanation, and also owed society for all the costs she had incurred over the years. But no matter what degrees Anu earned or what research she did, she would never ever forgive her. Joe's mother once said she had learned how to survive and move forward over the past 8 years, but she would never forget her son. Joe would always live in her memory. When she saw friends with their children, she couldn't help but imagine, if Joe were still alive, he might have married a good woman, started his own family, and had children of his own. All of that could have been possible, but Anu had taken it all away. For Joe's mother, that wound would never truly heal. In one interview, she directly called Anu the devil.
"Call you the devil, and you are the devil, monster."
No matter how much the victim's family protested, the case was legally closed. Later, several authors and filmmakers adapted the story into novels and films. Most notably, Helen Garner's 2004 book, Joe Cinque's Sconsolation, which sparked widespread public discussion in Australia and was later turned into a film. When the public learned that Anu had eventually earned a PhD, controversy exploded again online. Many found it deeply ironic that someone convicted for causing her boyfriend's death had become a Sydney Law School doctorate holder. People asked, is the world insane? Will she ever work on criminal cases? Will she naturally sympathize with offenders? The debates continued for a long time. But as they say, the internet has a short memory. No matter how infuriating a case, eventually it fades from public attention. Later, Anu lived with her parents in Sydney. Rao, the other woman involved, gradually disappeared in public view and later moved to the United States with her family to start a new life. For them, the 1997 case seemed like a distant memory. But for Joe's parents, it clearly wasn't. They had lost their son, and that loss could never be truly repaired by time. In fact, what makes this case worth reflecting on isn't just Anu alone, but also the people who knew the plan in advance. At the farewell gathering, Anu had invited many law students, people trained to recognize danger. They should have known that when someone repeatedly says they're going to harm themselves and take another unaware person with them, that is no longer venting. That is a warning sign requiring immediate action. But they knew the plan. Yet some attended, some gave money, some helped with drug information, some even recognized the danger, and still did nothing. Most terrifying of all, almost everyone knew, except Joe, the one whose life was actually at risk. Psychologists later analyzed this tragedy through the lens of the bystander effect. The bystander effect is the phenomenon where the more people who witness someone in danger, the less likely any single individual is to actually help, because everyone assumes someone else will act. In Joe's case, that collective indifference led to an irreversible outcome. If someone had truly believed Anu's words, if someone had told Joe, if someone had called the police, if someone had taken Joe away from that so-called farewell gathering, would the outcome have been different? We'll never know. But one thing is certain, when danger is real, silence is never without consequence. Let this tragedy be more than just a cold page in history. Let it be a mirror for all of us. When we see someone truly in danger, or know that someone plans to harm another, don't leave it to someone else. Sometimes one phone call, one word of warning, even just a few extra minutes of persistence can change a person's fate. And what Joe lacked back then was exactly that. Someone willing to step forward. That is the story for today. See you next time.